Hello everyone, it's Mr. E here, and today I'd like to talk about enemies for a change. Instead of talking about our player characters and builds and empowering ourselves as I usually do, I'd actually like to change the focus to the bad guys, because I think they are very, very important in their own right. As I see it, Darktide's balance and Darktide's fun factor comes down to a trifecta of three things. The first one, obviously, as it's just addressed, is our characters, our power. Does it feel good to use the skills and weapons that we have available in each class? Does it feel like your actual mechanical skill and contribution to the game can result in winning more games or better results or killing enemies faster or more effectively? If all of those are true, then they're doing okay on that first mark. The second mark is the environments that the fights take place in. And this is something that you can see very clearly in a lot of maps that are very beautiful. That's one factor that can go into enjoying the gameplay of Darktide, but also if the maps have engaging combat arenas is another very, very important factor here. I think a great example of a game that really uses its combat arenas to the fullest is Doom Eternal. Many of its best combats are defined by the difficult arenas that they take place in. So if you got those two, there's only one more element missing, and that's the enemies. That's the actual foes that you test your mettle against. If the enemies are not both challenging and threatening, then there's nothing really to overcome. There's no satisfaction in defeating them. So we need an enemy that can not only sort of push you to your limits and make you encourage to use different strategies or different tactics to remove them from the battlefield, but also enemies that can actually hurt you, that can do something against you, and it should feel like an overcoming a great obstacle when you defeat them, especially when we're talking about larger, elite enemies or boss enemies. Those should always feel like they are a task, an ordeal to overcome, and when you do it, you should feel a sign of satisfaction or great relief. And that is where I think that Darktide is a little bit lacking. As I've said many times before, I believe that Darktide is undergoing a bit of a renaissance, right? Especially with the characters that we have in play currently. We currently have seen reworks of many of the character cast. The early reworks where they got their character trees brought the characters from Darktide 1.0 into Darktide, let's say, 1.5. Oghren and Arbites are living comfortably in Darktide 2, and all of the enemies in the game are pretty much in Darktide 1.0 territory. They haven't updated their strategies. There's not any new additions that make you rethink the way the game is played or re-strategize. About the only thing that's been done to update the enemies is bringing in havoc modifiers like the pink aura that you can see in the footage here, or any of the other complications that Havoc brings. But for normal game modes, that is just not a feasible thing to do. So that's what I want to focus on today, is how can we update the cast of enemies such that they can be both threatening and challenging and rewarding to overcome, while also not overwhelming newer players who probably don't want to get slapped across the face with the sheer level of difficulty that some of these Havoc modifiers incorporate. Before I start dogging on some of the worst enemies, or not worst enemies in the game, but rather the enemies that I think are in need of a bit of a touch-up for the modern era, I do want to highlight a couple enemies that I think are doing their job very well, that are both challenging or pose an interesting difficulty twist to the game, and also feel rewarding when you overcome them, even if overcoming them is a relatively simple task. The first of those enemies is the dog, the noble dog, the Poxhound by any other name. He is pretty simple, right? He runs, he gets within a certain distance of you, and if he has line of sight on you, he'll set up a jump and then he'll pounce. If you happen to be directly in front of him when he's running in, he'll pounce directly from his sprint on you, and then he'll disable you. So dodging him is of utmost importance. Even just a dodge, or even just 1 second of his collision and being pounced on you, can disrupt you and can make you take other attacks as a result. So we definitely want to avoid dogs, and the second there's a dog on the battlefield, you know it, because he announces it with lots of barks and snarls and growls, and you know when a dog is lunging at you because he has a very obvious auditory tell. So I think it's a great design for an enemy, because not only does it make you play differently when there's even a single dog on the battlefield, but it's also a threat that's overcome relatively simply, and then, just like Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, you feel a great sense of satisfaction for having killed that dog. It does feel like a skill-based encounter. You either dodge the dog's jump, or at high levels of play, you can just kill the dog outright as it jumps at you, like stabbing him in the air, which is always a really, really swag move that feels cool to do. So I wish there was more, low health, sort of chaff enemies like that. The dog isn't that challenging, but just by being out there, you do have to think about, okay, I need to dodge whenever I hear the roar, and that if you don't do it, you're going to get severely punished. The same thing goes for another enemy that I want to highlight. I know a lot of people are going to probably complain about this and tell me that I'm wrong. This is actually a badly designed enemy, but the Trapper. I rated the Trapper very highly in my recent my recent tier list when I was talking about the enemies as a please fucking stop what you're doing tier enemy. If you didn't see that tier list, it's not prerequisite viewing for the discussion here, but it might be entertaining to you, so I'll link it in the description below. And also, while you're down there, if you could subscribe to the channel and like the video, that would be greatly helpful. I'm trying to reach Warhammer 40,000 subscribers by the end of the year. That's my personal goal, so help me reach that. It would be awesome, guys. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, the Trapper. The Trapper is very similar to the dog in that you hear some auditory cues, usually, that the Trapper is on the field, and as soon as one Trapper is on the field, it completely changes the terms of the engagement. In fact, you just saw in the encounter that's on the screen right now that I actually had to back up from that ledge because a Trapper dropped down, and rather than risking getting netted, I just backed away from the engagement entirely so that I wouldn't get netted and pulled into the fray. And that's what a Trapper can do to you, right? It forces you out of position, it forces you to play on its terms, because if a Trapper lands a hit on you, that can be game over. It can be absolutely disastrous. So you need to be conserving your dodges. You need to be making certain that you have space for dodges whenever there's a Trapper in the field. And I love that there is that sort of counterplay with it. And it is also one of the enemies that you feel so vindicated when you kill a Trapper, right? They are just bastards. They are awful, awful enemies. They're so sneaky. They try to run away once they've gotten you, or once they trap someone or miss their trap, and you'd feel so good in chasing them down or throwing a knife into their back as they're running away. And I wish that more enemies had that feeling of satisfaction when you claim victory over them. The final enemy I want to give kudos to in being a well-designed, threatening, challenging enemy that feels satisfying to overcome is Rinda Karnak, or generally the Karnak twins. Now, the Karnak twins and Rinda Karnak herself only appear in high-level content, right? You're gonna only encounter them in a few story missions, and then outside of that, you'll only see them in Havoc. And that means it's a high-level, high skill-level threat, but I think she is perfectly suited for that, right? On higher difficulties, where higher skill players are playing, the normal bosses just aren't cutting the mustard anymore. They just don't have enough going on. Their movesets are very, very simple, and they're easy to block, they're easy to predict, and oftentimes they just get bullied out of doing anything they wanted to do. Most players at the level where you're playing Havoc can solo any one of those bosses given enough time and space. So Rinda is different on that front. Rinda pretty much cannot be soloed. She's simply too aggressive, and she can punish even the best of players by pushing you out of position, and that can just completely ruin an encounter. So when you have Rinda on the field, you have to completely alter how you're playing to accommodate the fact that she can push you out of position, that she can do all sorts of nonsense, that she's going to be hyper aggressive, and then you have to collaborate with your team in order to take care of her and just dunk her as fast as possible. And once you finally do, you feel so good. Oh, like, yes, 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 we got her, we got rid of her. What a nuisance she was. And that is what I want bosses to more feel like, rather than the captains here, where they're just slow and methodical, and they just take forever to chunk through their shields. I would much rather the captains that we have in the game take on the aesthetics or the gameplay mechanics of Rinda, where the shield stays down for a set amount of time rather than recharging every quarter of the health bar. And I think that's another great thing that makes fighting Rinda instead of the captains feel more engaging, is the faster you deal damage to them, the bigger reward. For captains, it's just a long, slow fight no matter what. Okay, so that's enough glazing of the relatively good members of the cast. There are more that I think are doing all right in terms of being relatively competent and challenging and fun to play against in modern Darktide, but I want to focus on a couple today that are definitely not meeting that metric. And the first one is the Crusher. The Crusher is the flagship difficult enemy in Darktide who starts to appear at difficulties Heresy and above. And he is difficult only in air quotes here as I'm using it. You can't see my fingers, but I'm doing air parentheses for emphasis. The reason he isn't truly difficult is due to the way that the game has developed its meta over time. Now, the three things that make the Crusher difficult on paper are his armor values, his carapace armor, meaning he reduces enemy damage to him by a lot for most types of weapons, his health value, which is pretty high in comparison to most non-boss enemies, and of course his one overhead attack that can kill you instantly. So if you're unable to dodge that overhead attack, if you just are skill challenged or you don't have any space, that's a problem for you. If you aren't carrying a weapon that can effectively penetrate armor, that's another problem for you. And if you don't have enough single target damage to effectively remove him from the field, that's a third problem. The issue that the Crusher has with existing in the modern meta is that many players have the solutions to these things. I mean, the Dueling Sword is a one-stop solution for many of these things, but let's also talk about the Ogryn and the Arbites, who have an even better solution, which is to stagger the Crusher to the point where he can't even interact with the game at all. It doesn't matter how much damage you have. It doesn't matter how much damage he has when he spends his entire lifetime rolling around on the floor being beat to death. So that is the ultimate hurdle that the Crusher needs to overcome in order to reassert himself as a challenging and interesting enemy within Darktide. He needs some space to do what he needs to do. That's the thing that sets the three examples I gave before, the actually like fun to engage with enemies, out from the rest of the cast. Is no matter how little health they have or how little armor they have. I mean, the dog falls over with a slight breeze, right? But he pretty much always gets to do at least one instance of what he is designed to do, right? And same with the Trapper. It's very rare that you eliminate them before they get to shoot a single net off. So if we can make the Crusher have something going on where he can actually serve his battlefield purpose, which is crowding the enemies, getting into melee, leading the charge, and threatening them with high damage, heavy swing melee attacks, well, then that'll be a success. Right now, the problem is, though, he has no way of getting close to our allies or, just penetrating our defenses at all. Most of his attacks barely tickle. And then the one attack that he has is very slow and telegraphed, and many players are already looking out for it. And since he can be so easily staggered, he can just be staggered out of that animation, and you don't even have to worry about that attack in the first place. So what will we do to fix this problem? Well, I have come up with a little bit of a solution, and I'm taking inspiration from a nearly 20-year-old game. You might be familiar with it. It's called Halo Combat Evolved. In Halo Combat Evolved, the main enemy forces are comprised of elites. Elites are humanoid aliens who can wield a variety of alien weaponry, including plasma rifles, plasma pistols, grenades, swords, all of the above. And they are very, very clever in the way that they implement them. They can throw grenades to flush you out from cover, they can dodge your grenades and attacks, they will flank your position, and they're very devious. Many players, including 12-year-old myself at the time, were incredibly impressed with how aggressive and clever this AI seemed, but it really isn't. Because, I mean, this is a game from 20 years ago. AI of today is certainly much more clever in a computational way, it simply has to be, and early testers of the game were actually very unimpressed with the elites. They thought that the elites were stupid and actually needed to have their AI redone, that they were just too simple to combat. Bungie did take this into account, but they made changes between release and the beta tests, but none of it was to do with the Covenant AI, though players were impressed with the AI upon release. So what happened? Well, all Bungie did was to raise the health values of the elites. And that is basically what I'm speaking to when I'm talking about the Crusher here. Giving the elites more health in this scenario gave them a chance to actually do what they need to do, to be threatening, to go through some of their combat subroutines, to flank the player, to outsmart the player. If they die in one hit, they never get a chance to exhibit any of their special abilities, and that's a problem that the Crusher is running into currently. They simply don't get the time to exist to show any more than 1 or 2 attacks. I think many players would be incredibly surprised to know that the Crusher has 6 different attacks. They have an uppercut, they have a left-handed jab, they have a butt with the back of their maul, they have a horizontal swing with their maul, and they have the overhead, and maybe there's even one more. But this many attacks, and yet you never see almost any of them, because it's very rare to find a Crusher that lasts long enough to do all these things. So I think the first things that need to be done in order to bring the Crusher up to a modern standard is to make certain he gets enough health to do what he needs to do. And as we addressed previously, health alone isn't enough of a factor to make an enemy good, because they also have to be able to stand up to stagger. If an enemy is staggered and simply cannot combat you, then it doesn't matter how much health they have. So the second thing I'd like to do for the Crusher is make them stagger proof or stagger resistant to a very, very high degree, so they can actually get some of their attacks off. At the same time, we definitely need to remove the absolute clown car of Crushers that is higher difficulties at the current meta. I think that maybe 2 Crushers, such as you see in the current engagement, is a relatively good amount, but not 5 or 6 or 10. That's because I also want to give them more threatening attacks. I want to treat them more like mini bosses that they're supposed to be, based on their size and their health and their armor values, than what they actually are, which is glorified groaners. So as far as attacks, I think we should look to these captains in order to inspire them. These captains have a variety of attacks that I think would be a great fit for the Crushers, because the Crushers, if we're going to make them more threatening individual enemies, they should also have attacks that can hit multiple enemies and can threaten a larger zone, just like these captains do. So firstly, these captains, when they hit you with their kicks and punches, they launch you backwards. I think the Crusher should also have this added. Currently, he only pushes you probably about this distance from the target once you are punched backwards. I also think that he should then follow that attack up while you are still immobilized and slowed with an overhead, so that you have to worry about taking that 1-2 punch. The other attack I'd love to see come to this Plague Ogre is the Sweeping Whirlwind. Hopefully I can get the captain to do it here. This one, where he charges up the attack and he sweeps it around him. That would mean, that right there, that would mean that you have to be aware of having one of these Crushers anywhere near your vicinity. So eliminating them would become a priority task for any member of the team. Also, making their overheads knock you backwards, even if you block the attack, would be a great, great difference over the current pretty much 0 feedback you get. I think that since these captains were a much more recent introduction to the game, they've had a lot more time to kind of develop these combat ideas, and we could see a lot more of this sort of stuff implemented into the current melee landscape, especially with Crushers. The second enemy I want to talk about is this guy, the Plague Ogre. The Plague Ogre is just sort of a victim of Darktide 1.0 yet again. He is the easiest boss by far for players to handle, and that's because all of his attacks are very, very telegraphed. They are mostly single target attacks, and they don't do very much damage. It's pretty hard to die to this guy. Case in point, I mean, you could just block him all day with no damage taken, make certain my invulnerability is off, and you'll be given plenty of chance. Oh, I spawned a second one accidentally. You'll be given plenty of chance to deal damage to him because he has so many long wind-up attacks, or attacks that when he misses and overcommits, you just get to deal like 5 or 6 attacks back to him. So I think that though it's okay that there's like weaker bosses and stronger bosses in the game, I think it would be more appropriate to have every boss be a difficult challenge to 1v1, and the Plague Ogre just is not currently meeting that metric. So I'd love to see his attacks be more devastating. Perhaps his like ground stomp like slows you, and then he attempts to follow up on you with overhead smashes while you are limited in your mobility. Something to get him out of this rut where one player can easily take him to a corner and just beat him to death. He's just not very challenging in any way, shape, or form, but the only thing he can do is use his uppercut or his stomp or his charge to throw you off a ledge, and that's about it. But I have a very interesting idea with what they should do with the existing moveset of this Plague Ogre, which, as we can see here, he has a couple of moves. He's got this stomp that knocks everything back. He's got this 3 whip back and forth attack. And he's got this uppercut that can throw you a good distance, and he's got an overhead smash. I think they should take this moveset and translate it onto the last enemy that I want to talk about today. And that is the Bulwark. The Bulwark is one of the most maligned enemies in the game. He is super boring. He is so boring to engage with and so painful to deal with. Now imagine him having the moveset that the Plague Ogre does. Imagine that once he engages you in melee combat, he stops being just this annoying, huge plate shield that you can't get past unless he voluntarily opens himself up, and instead turns to whipping you 3 times with his shield back and forth like the Plague Ogre does with his claw, or stomping and sending you reeling backwards, or smashing you with the shield and sending you flying. All of those are things that a Plague Ogre or a Bulwark should be able to do. They are an Ogre after all. They're pretty damn strong. So I would love to see the Ogre adapt a more offensive capability once he is engaged in melee, because currently the problem is if you are attacking them, they are very loath to open themselves to attacks, and then once they do, they're pretty chump. Like, this is all you do, is you just wait for the attack to open, and that's it. I would love to see those Bulwarks, since they're supposed to be greater threats, be able to not only have their defenses when they're at range, but once they come into close range, have some more CC abilities and be able to push enemies around. I think the most interesting thing Ogrins do is they have this little shield pump that they do, that one right there, and that actually staggers you out of any animation unless you are an Ogrin. And that's a pretty cool interrupt that they have. I'd like to see more of that sort of stuff from the Ogrin. That would give them a role in being a combat interrupter and CC tank, even if they don't do the most damage in the world. And that's it for this little rant, this little spiel about enemies today, guys. I certainly think and hope that Fat Shark realizes that enemies are sort of their weak point right now. We've got a good variety for the classes. They're certainly working on getting those last few classes reworked and brought up to speed. And the maps are okay. I wish we had a few more, but the real thing that's lacking is we haven't seen a significant enemy update in a very, very long time. I mean, we've had the addition of the Pox Bomber, we've had the addition of the Twins and the Captains, and that's about it, right? Everything else has stayed the same. So I think it's about time that we get a full revamp and get some new mechanics in with these guys and keep them modern, because our skills and our weaponry have evolved to the point where these threats just aren't posing a threat anymore, and so the only way the game has to overwhelm us is just sheer numbers. And I think it would be awesome to see some of these classic enemies revamped and brought into the modern era, and also perhaps introducing some new varieties of enemies, especially from a different faction, would be super cool. But that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and Mystery out. Bye.